Shinkai, not Toriyama,
but Miyazaki.
So, instead of introducing him and waste my breath, I'm going to introduce myself. I'm Mr. Riku Mellin, a university student from Tracon, and today we will be talking about the good, the bad, and the ugly concerning Mr. Miyazaki. And for that, I have a short note that I've made concerning Miyazaki. Mr. Miyazaki and his team of artists have created visions of beauty and wonder for more than 40 years. Truly, the world of animation would not be the same without his excellent craftsmanship and unparalleled vision. Indeed, where would we be without the fairy tale-like forest of Totoro, the thrill-seeking adventures of Nausicaa, or the ever-determined Chichiro? The following presentation is not meant to diminish the value of the works in question, but simply clarify aspects that in no way harm the incredible works of Miyazaki. So, let's get down to business. What I want to do today is approach, the works of Mr. Miyazaki in a more of a holistic manner, by which I mean that we are going to go from the first movie to the last movie within the next 40 or so minutes, from the perspective of storytelling. What are these stories trying to tell us? And a bit more importantly, how? Now you might be wondering, what does that have to do with, a work of a great animation director? And the answer is that, animation fundamentally is a team effort. And thanks to the personal computer revolution that has revolutionized animation about twice since he started animating himself, it's a little bit hard to gauge Miyazaki himself and how he has developed throughout those 20 or so, 40 or so years that he has been doing his movies. At moments, it might feel like I'm being overtly critical. At moments, it might feel like I'm being sort of mean. But I would just say that if we were to rate movies from 0 to 100, it's a wholly different question to ask the question, all right, so we've got a movie that's about 50. How would we go about doing it by 55? Versus, we got a movie here that, goes about 90. What about 95? 5 points, yet, just a completely different story. And you really start to take it apart in a sort of way. And with that, let's get started. So Mr. Miyazaki's career starts about 1984. I'm going to be a little bit graceful and not talk about his very first movie, Lupin III, because no one else really talks about it, so why should I? So we will first start with the very first movie that he had almost complete control over, Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind, in 1984. Now, what kind of a story is Nausicaa? It's about a post-apocalyptic world, just a desert. There was a huge war, everything went bad, everything's bad. And so in there, we have what I would like to refer to as a Steve Jobs tale. Now, what is that? Basically, the world was going one way, then Steve Jobs came and he went the other way. Huge worlds, of great importance, and characters in them become important by changing it. That's sort of a story we are looking around here. Secondly, because it's a post-apocalyptic story, it also has an inherent environmental message. We've done bad things in the framework of the movie because it's a post-apocalyptic world and it's a desert, right? And the fascinating thing about it, it's basically embedded into the story. So we follow this young girl called Nausicaa who is a bit of an explorer. Goes up from one place to a place in the desert looking for something valuable. A woman not afraid of danger, by constantly. The movie starts with an action scene where she saves a friend. Right. And so they make that character a little bit fascinating by presenting her with a group of humans who are invading that little part of their world. And immediately, as she sees the threat of these humans, she just goes completely bonkers and attacks them. So we have something there that we can use the movie to explore. We have a fascinating character story maybe going on over here, which is a bit by bit explored. Now, what I took notice of the movie is that there really are parts of it that really don't fit as well as the others. And you've got that basic story. You've got an invading force invading that girl's home, a leader of them who has this great vision that she's going to change the world. And you've got this fascinating conflict between our main character and this invading force. You basically got your movie there. They start adding things that really don't, in a way, sort of fit that very well. At least how I thought about it. As a matter of fact, we could just completely remove them, and the movie, at its core, almost remains the same. Once again, because we've already got this fascinating struggle over here with already well-made characters. So I started thinking about it after seeing the movie, and I went to this Wikipedia page and I realized that there's something very fascinating about this movie that is pretty much unique. Which is the fact that, if you look at that poster over there, that's the movie for the poster. That's a movie for the manga series of which it is based off. Now, adaptation, that's not a new thing. I would dare say. People constantly take manga and turn it into anime. But the fascinating part about this is the fact that it's his manga series. And secondly, when he made the movie, it was not done. So you're almost breaking one of the cardinal rules at adaptation. You're asking a creator who's very into his own story here. So how about you cut it by 1 to a 1/4 size and make it all fit in a movie? That's a very hard thing to ask for a creator, really. And you see it in that way that, once again, I discussed that this is a big world story. The world is in one way, and at the end of the movie, the world is another way. But fascinatingly, that change happens not near the end of the movie, really, but at the middle point of it. I would invite you to actually look the movie up again and realize a moment when, maybe this world ain't so bad. That transformation happens at the middle way point. Because, Miyazaki had a little bit of time, and he had to take his huge story that, he probably hadn't even completed by that point. The manga wasn't finished. And he just has to take it all and stuff it into one movie. Unfortunate thing, and it shows a little bit. Not, saying the movie is garbage. It's a very good movie. It's a very beautiful movie, but we can take those underpinnings there, that lesson. So number one, what does he like to do when he gets the opportunity to make movies? He wants to make big stories with big messages about the environment, at its core. And we are introduced now to our first movie, which is an adaptation of his own work. Just sort of an off note, you might be wondering, all right, so I'm talking about adaptation. What would be a good example of a good adaptation in anime? And that would be the 2009 show, K-On! Take the manga and take the anime upon comparison, there's a sort of a beautiful way in which they take that boring manga, ditch out the bad things, and make things for the anime that make it work. It's a hallmark of a good adaptation, is that you don't respect it. Another sort of very good example of an adaptation is the very, very very iconic Blade Runner, because we're based on a book called Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? And if you read the book and you watch the movie, they're almost two completely different beasts. But the director there understood that, okay, we are not making a book, we are making a movie. And so we are going to have to use a different kind of a tool set here, people. And that would be, those initial lessons that we are going to have to take from the very first movie here. Now, time passes on, it's 1986. Laputa, the castle in the sky, comes out. What sort of a movie is Laputa? Well, it's surprisingly similar, right? It has a sort of a post-apocalyptic tale about a previous civilization which had robots, and people had the ability to fly from one place to another. Raise your hand if you know of a civilization where people use robots and they can fly from one place to another. Right, so we have, once again, a big world story where there's a direct link to the world of our own, and there's an embedded environmental message here. Right. The power play at the end of the movie is, how do we use this great power of ours? Now, as Laputa is a Miyazaki original, no one came to help him. He just had to make the story himself. So I would like to take a brief note and look to a sort of an indie movie series. I doubt you maybe have heard of it. It's called Star Wars. And take the very first Star Wars movie with the New Hope and its main character, Luke Skywalker, and compare a little bit about how do these characters work in that story. Both of them are the Steve Jobs stories, right? We got in Laputa, we got this small boy and meets the princess and goes save the world, which at the end is different from the one which they started from. Same in Star Wars. We got the Luke, princess comes in, two robots, the princess comes in, and at the end of the day they store the Death Star, and the world is wholly different from which they started. So thinking about Luke, he has, a very typical hero's journey. He's a young lad working in a boring desert planet farm, wishing to join the academy and become a starfighter pilot and escape his boring life. Two robots coming with a plea from a princess. Exciting. In his travels, he meets a wizard who teaches him the ancient ways of the mythical force. Lovely. And like any good, hero's journey, a classical hero's journey, he's given the opportunity to go back. Do you go on with the adventure, or do you go back to the farm, wait your year out, and go to the academy? And he first chooses to abandon the journey. Goes back home only to realize that the people chasing those robots, the empire, has killed his family, and he's dead set locked on that adventure. Now, comparing to the main character of Laputa, I've got to say, it's a bit more light in content here. He's a dude who's just happy with his life. A princess comes from the sky, chased by people. Of course, he's a good scout boy. So, of course, he goes in and helps her. There is a sort of an amulet which leads him to an adventure about a flying castle. And thankfully, his father was interested in flying castles. So, of course, he just goes off, leaves everything, and goes on the journey. And here comes, one of the sort of problems with these big world stories in general, which is that, stories are fundamentally, the moving block here is characters. And if you cannot make that character interesting, then I do not care, how big of a world you've got, it's going to be a boring adventure. Now, not saying that this is a boring movie, but I got to say, the things that are, making it excellent is not the Boy Scout main character who just goes on to dangerous situation after dangerous situation, without really no other motivation that, he's a good scout boy. He likes to help. The second fascinating characteristic about Laputa is that it has this guy. This is a pretty much unique thing in a Miyazaki movie because he's a villain. He wants power, and nothing is going to stop him from taking it. There's really no other Miyazaki movie with this sort of a character. Now there's a bit of a problem here if you want to have a villain type character, because as we said, these tales are also about having that normative environmental story. Now, as a fan of saving the planet, going on about telling people that if you kill a dude, you can save the environment, is a pretty bad message. Because what we fundamentally want to tell in our environmental stories is that if we work together, we can solve these sorts of things. You can see these sort of boring, childish stories about how to fix the world constantly. For instance, one of the greatest sort of mistales about the current life, especially in politics, is that if we were to just make the current most popular party disappear from the planet, then everything would turn out okay. Which is at its core is a very bad message to tell people, because it tells them that if you just find the bad people and get rid of them, then everything will be okay. That would be about the lesson that I want you to take from Nausicaa. Is the fact that you've got this young director here who's mainly used doing television anime. And when I look at Laputa, it's a very excellent two-episode show of your favorite action anime, when you really think about it. That lack of character-driven story makes sense, if you have 13 episodes lined up, and this would be about the two-part episode of it. But unfortunately, we are no longer in the realm of TV anime, and that's something that this director here has to learn from a hard way. Moving on to his third movie, Totoro. I'm not going to be talking about a lot of it because it works. It's a story about two children finding fascinating creatures in a forest, and sort of a launching board in a way for the fact that not everything's okay in the household. The lesson here is that they didn't shoot that for the stars. They want to make a simple, effective movie, and they accomplished it. You have the right goals, you work at it, and you succeed. I most wholeheartedly recommend Totoro to anyone here. Now here comes the turning point, 1989. Kiki's Delivery Service. Because this is not a story about Steve Jobs saving the planet, but it's a character story about a young witch who goes on to perform their adolescence ritual to become an adult, and that is about her going from her home to a wholly new and learning how to live on her own. This sort of a character-driven story, is a first by him. It's a huge experiment. And to really appreciate it, I have to draw your attention to another anime movie called Grave of the Fireflies. Anyone seen Grave of the Fireflies? Right. So we are on the level here. So those of you who didn't raise your hands, it's a World War II movie about two war orphans in World War II Japan. Just be miserable the whole 2 hours. I mean, really, that's the core experience there. Is that you've got these orphans, and it's hard-striking how they have to struggle. That's something that I would like to refer to as being a little bit lazy, because that story, that core experience there, it writes itself when you really think about it. Like love it to death, but at its core, it's not a huge leap, other than the fact that it's probably one of the first anime that really did that sort of a story. Now, as we move back to Kiki's delivery service, that's when we discovered that this is a huge experiment here. Because raise your hand if you had broad experiences of your own adolescence, that you look on those years proudly. Not a lot of adults who are willing to do that step. So having your story centered around a girl who has difficulties growing up as the main experience, the main core experience here, it takes a lot of guts. If I were his producer, I would say, take this stupid idea away. I want more fighting. Surprisingly, it really doesn't make the most popular cut in that, top 10 Miyazaki movies. And the place where I would like to, point to that is the location, because it's a nondescript city. That at the end of the day, she comes in there, she has problems there, really doesn't know the place. And at the end of the movie, she has grown up. She's adapted to become a part of that city, but I really cannot share the experience because there is still a nondescript city. I'd like to do something, a little bit experimental and point you to a movie that is not an anime. Terrifying thought, but there's a very good comedy movie called Local Hero, which is about this American oil executive coming to a Scottish town to buy it out. And he goes there, and it's just a bunch of riffraff, bunch of village people. And at the end of the movie, he comes back home to America, and the first thing that he does is he calls back and wants to go there again, because through the whole movie, the village grew on him. He fell in love with the idea of that village. If there is any movie that makes the case for those British soap operas like Emmerdale, Heartbeat, Kotikatu, it's in there. And that's the element that when I think about Kiki's delivery service, is unfortunately missing. 1992, Porco Rosso, very important year I was born. But the other fact is that there was this very fascinating Miyazaki movie called Porco Rosso. Now, it inherits the same characteristic as Kiki's Delivery Service. Not a big world story. Not people changing the world. It's about this World War I war veteran that has such a bad time in World War II, imagine that he turned into a pig. And the whole movie is his personal journey on how to actually, at the end of the day, live his life. And it's a very fascinating case because we are shifting here a little bit from that big tales about, for instance, the environment to a question of violence. Because, we are talking about a World War I veteran capable of being violent, doesn't do too many times of it. But that question of, I'm a violent person, I've lived a violent life, how do I live? That question of violence is still omnipresent in the entire experience. And that sort of a more abstract take on violence is introduced. And I'm just going to go on because it's fascinating and at the end of the day, no one likes a guy, liking something. So let's move on to something that I don't actually like that much, unfortunately. 1997, Mononoke. It's a bit of a step backwards if we, take the elements that we got here. What's this about? It's about setting your story in one of the most, stereotypical periods for a Japanese film. From 7 samurai to 13 assassins, this place with the buildings there and the people in the rice farms. A very stereotypical, story over there. We've got the big world thing back. At the end of the day, in Princess Mononoke, the world is different from the one which we started. We've got the heavy-handed environmentalism back. We've got this village of people who want to take down, who basically want to take down this forest. At the end of the day, that's kind of the struggles that we are facing in this movie. And we've got another bloody Boy Scout of a main character Because, I just looking at me, he just sucks the excitement out of me. He's got a hand, a cursed hand, that forces him to action at the beginning of the movie. He needs to go to this forest and seek the cure. Does this aspect, this hand, serve any other part of the movie than, just being that constant time bomb, clicking thingy that forces him to go on with the story? No. Does he have anything interesting to say? No. Why does he do good things? Because he's a Boy Scout. And he only has the strength of a 10-man, which is probably one of the worst things from Japan. Because, at the same time, he is so powerful that normal battle scenes are pretty much boring. Because, no normal man can hurt him. But he's not as strong as Goku. Meanwhile, we've got this Mononoke here. He's a very fascinating character. In between two worlds, raised by wolves. She is in the middle of this conflict between this village and this forest where these magical creatures live. A very magical wolf. And we have to start asking the question. And we've got these fascinating pieces here. We've got the struggle between the village and the forest. We've got this girl, Mononoke, here. How do we drive this story forward? Which is this guy just yapping on about different sorts of characters. I think that, she should return back to humans. And the wolf responds, she can never return back to humans. But can she? The same thing, unfortunately, with the environmental message here. She goes on to leave the village saying, can't we just work together in peace? No. But can we? No. And that's very unfortunate, because for such an action-packed Steve Jobs tale, there's quite a lot of just boring dialogue going on over here, which ought to really be explored through that action once again. So as I said, we are taking a bit of a step backwards here, in a sort of way. Instead of fascinating character development, we have a Boy Scout that fights. I don't think that that's super fascinating. Moving on. We come to part 2 today. Why the distinction? Well, for one reason, that's a point when I started seeing Miyazaki movies. But secondly, because we are dropping that idea of young people changing the world aspects. There's never going to be another movie like that again. Not in the vein of Nausicaa, Laputa, or Mononoke. Let's start with the first one. Spirited Away. A heavily character-centered story about a young girl who is lost in a bathhouse of the gods. Her parents are turned into pigs. And she needs to change in order to get out of there, because she's just some 7-year-old bratty child. She needs to change in order to get out of there. We've got a slew of fascinating characters, from the owner of the bathhouse to the mysterious Haku boy. Very fascinating tale going on over here. What also returns is that bit of a more abstract notion of violence. Because, you go and watch that movie, who are the characters who use violence? The only ones with, a bit of a chip on their shoulder. Problems. Our main character here never uses violence, and that's one of the reasons why she gets to go home, among other things. But the really fascinating part here is that, I talked about, environmental messaging, and I might have come out of here, thinking that, if you just add the question environment, that makes your boring, well, that makes your boring bad too, but that makes your movie bad, which is not true. So I point to about a middle way scene in this movie, in which, the stink guard comes into the bathhouse. He's stinky. They take him in, and they realize that there's something, a bit wrong with him other than, stinking. Something, sort of a spike in him. And what they do is that they work together, pull all of that stuff out, and they realize it was not a stink guard, it was a river guard. Well, there was this whole lot of things, this garbage around him. Now that to me is a very excellently put, story concerning sort of a normative message about the environment. You have to work together to save the day. And what caused it? A bunch of garbage, that's my toilet seat. And the best part of it was that, no one looked into the camera and said, "Remember, kids, recycle." Why is that important? Why is it important that no one actually says it? I mean, you already understand. You understand it. Take a look at your favorite romantic movie. If it's really done well, our two characters in love, they never have to start a scene by saying, "I love you," and end the scene by saying, "I love you," because it's told non-verbally. Humans communicate in other ways than verbal, and when you manage to send a message non-verbally, it becomes incredibly intuitive. Once again, go back to your romantic movies. Now, as much as I like talking good things about a movie that I like, there are a few things that I'd like to point to it that are a bit more problematic, which is, I don't know if you can read it all the way down the back, but the question in this interview from Miyazaki was that, is it true that your films are all made without a script? And he's answered back, no, that's true. I don't have the story finished and ready when we start work on a film. I usually don't have the time, so the story develops when I start drawing the storyboards. So that's very fascinating. And a little bit unique in the sense that you don't actually have a script ready when you start making a film. And unfortunately, if you really look at Spirited Away, it shows in part. After that scene, our awesome scene with the river god, we got about 15 minutes of a down time, in which she at one moment just stands, and just waits for the for the movie to continue. I remember when I saw this in the film theaters, I thought my sort of 10-year-old me thought, 7-year-old me thought that, it's like this movie never ends. And now that I look back at it at the age of 26, I look at it and say to myself, it's like this movie never ends. So there's a bit of a problem with the second part here in how you are building up tension, Much like, Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers, you've got to have that steadily rising action to the climax of the movie. Secondly, you start seeing this problem with the script because, around 1 hour, 15 minutes in, they start introducing new characters from nowhere. That really tells me that this movie was originally about 3 hours and 45 minutes, and at the end of the day, you just had to cut it. And I would, point that as one of the, major problems that Miyazaki has in general, which is, he doesn't have a finished script when he starts making his films. It's very unique, and as you can, and as I would point out, it does have its set of problems. Let's move on to Howl's Moving Castle. Once again, a character-driven story about a girl who meets a wizard and about their struggles, which at the end of the movie, culminates with, having a happy ending. No changing of the world, just, two people on the question of, how at the end of the day, are we going to get them together, really? I would like to make a brief comparison with the most popular anime movie of all time, Makoto Shinka's Your Name. And I would like to welcome you to compare and contrast these two films because, the problem with Makoto Shinkawa's film that was told to me by a friend of mine, I'm not as smart as to come with these things originally, but the fact is that, Your Name has two plots. The A plot, which is about, this story about body changing between these two different people, realizing things about each other, understanding each other. And he has a B plot about and that B plot really doesn't add to the experience of the A plot, but rather at the best of it just adds a sort of a ticking time bomb element that makes it exciting. But fundamentally, House Moving Castle in its experience is just having these two people going through difficulties. It culminates them at the end of him, achieving their happy ending. The important part here in this successful film is that it's an adaptation. He had a book from which to have a cheat sheet from. And at the end of the day, with it, he was able to produce a fantastic film with a fantastic story. Now, got to speed up things a little bit. So, talking about Ponyo. Ponyo, 2008, it's in a way, once again, a bit of a step backwards. You've got these young people going all over the place, kind of-ish saving the world. And as a Miyazaki original, once again, I have to point out that, at the end of the day, we've got these moving parts here, and I have just no idea what are they doing there at the end of the day, and what are they adding to that experience. But I just thought a bit of a mean twist. The main problem here is this father character. So Ponyo is about this young fish who meets a boy, and the fish wants to become a human. But, she's got a father who, at least according to him, wants to kill all humans. This revolting era of man will be over. And at the end of the movie, you can just see him there looking as his daughter has been stolen, turned into a human, and there's nothing that he can really do about it. I was left quite unsettled at the end of the movie experience because we've got this fascinating character here, but because we are so busy with the action all over the place, that fascinating character wasn't really addressed. But anyway, I'm just poking a bit fun at it. Finally, we come to the Wind Riders. This movie has so many problems. I can't name any of them. It has a fascinating tale about an aeroplane engineer who lives in this world of violence, in the interwar period, right before the World War II. The powder kept blowing, right? And he has to think how to live his life. Are dreams meaningful? Is beauty but that few seconds of a fascinating cloud formation? Therefore, a few seconds just goes away. Oh, sorry. There we go. I don't, I would point out in a sort of a childish fashion, this thing, doesn't fit well in this story, but can't think of too many of those here. It's because, this movie was very well put together. Had a consistent theme. Had good characters. And the key piece here, why that is because it's another adaptation. But it's the best sort of an adaptation of Miyazaki because it comes and hits me right back in the head. Because it's his own adaptation, but a short manga that he most certainly just made to have the story ready for the movie. It's right. So at the end of the day, when he has that moment and he can sit down and write that script, I'm just going to say, I'm not going to go on a tangent here and just pointing out every brilliant thing about him. I'm just going to say it's brilliant. Brilliant little movie. Sort of reminds me the thing that Chairman Mao said about movie making. We must make a distinction between the enemy and ourselves, and we must not adopt an antagonistic stand towards comrades and treat them as we would the enemy. In speaking up, one must have an ardent desire to protect the cause of the people and raise their political consciousness, and there must be no ridiculing or attacking one's approach. And I agree with Chairman Mao on this one. Movie making is about, taking all of those parts of that movie production and making them work together in balance. And this is a fantastic example of it. So I'm here to summarize at the end. We start with a young movie director who is best comfortable with action anime on television. He's put on movies, he tries to make them work, doesn't work that completely, doesn't work as well as one could hope. And so he starts to experiment. Character-driven plots, questions and themes that center around the characters themselves. And at the end of it, I just got to say that, he just makes brilliant films. I think he makes brilliant films all the time, but I like the later ones more than the earlier ones, got to admit. The biggest problem here, with Miyazaki, is the fact that, he doesn't have a well thought out story when he starts making the animation. If he does that, I have nothing to complain about, and I can rest. Thank you. If you have questions, comments, criticisms, I've made an email just for you. Do not be shy. And I would just like to say thank you.